r/AskReddit. Police officers of Reddit, what is your best I think we have the wrong person story? I've got two. From 25 years ago, when I was a cop, one on one side of the badge, and one from the other. The first, I got assigned a warrant service to pick up a wanted felon. Mr. Robertson was 6 feet tall, 250 pounds, long red hair, bushy red beard, and lived at, let's say, 123 Elm Street. Pretty distinctive dude. So I roll up to 123 Elm Street, and sure enough, there mowing his lawn in the front yard is the man himself. 6 feet, 250, red hair, red beard. I make contact with him. Hey, Mr. Robertson, you got warrants, and it's time to go to jail. Hook him up, take him to jail, and in central booking I get his property off him. And while filling out the inventory happen to notice this guy's Mr. Robinson, not Robertson. Sure enough, the wanted guy was my guy's landlord, and his twin brother from another mother doppelganger. When I'd said Robertson, Robinson didn't even twig to the fact I hadn't said his name. He just heard the similar sounding name as his own. We had to walk the whole thing back and reactivate the warrant, then kicked him loose with a handshake and an apology. The one from the other side, I had just gotten off duty at 2 AM and was driving home still in uniform. There wasn't any other traffic on the road, so I wasn't really surprised when a police car turned in behind me and started following me. I figured he was trolling for drunks, and I was the only thing moving on the road, so he was just going to follow me a little to observe my driving, and he'd realize pretty quick I was sober and peel off. Instead, another patrol car joined him, and another, and another. Then all four lit me up and spread out behind me, blocking the road in a full felony stop. Well, this just got interesting. They went through the whole procedure, and I carefully followed their instructions. When they finally got me out and saw my uniform, they just stopped for a few seconds while I was trying to figure out just what the hell was going on. Then 3 of the officers got in their cars, turned off their lights, and took off, while the original officer told me I could put my hands down and explained what was going on. My car was a spot-on match for the suspect vehicle in an armed robbery and shooting that had just occurred right up the road. I'd driven right by the scene before the cops even got there a few minutes before the officer in the next district spotted me and thought I was the suspect. It was an interesting night. Not a cop, but the wrong person in question. There is another man 2 years younger than me who shares my first and last name. Exact same spelling, the only difference is the middle name. Police were investigating a county trustee who was giving people housing assistance checks they didn't qualify for. They would cash the assistance and give the trustee a percentage back. One of the civilians being investigated was the other guy. A plainclothes cop in an unmarked car shows up with a female holding a clipboard, identifies himself as a state trooper, and within 5 minutes is asking me for copies of my bank records. He's threatening to subpoena if I don't comply. This isn't the first time I've been mistaken for him. I used to get his mail all the time, and I even asked if they were looking for me or the other guy, pointing out our different middle names. I got really suspicious really fast. A high pressure situation, demanding access to my financial records, threats of subpoenas, and further legal action. So I started to doubt this was an actual police officer and was in fact just a scammer. The badge he showed me was just a plastic square like my driver's license, further muddying the issue. I told him I wanted to speak with the police and called dispatch. 2 uniformed officers showed up 15 minutes later and confirmed the guy was an officer. The woman with him was some kind of auditor and records keeper. After a further 15 minutes of questions, the woman pulled the guy away and pointed out something on her phone. Yep, they wanted the other guy. I live in a small town in rural England, and we used to get some trainees/new police officers from the Met there for their training. Me and some of my friends were teenagers. We were walking to the supermarket, because what else is there to do in a small town pre-internet? Suddenly from out of nowhere this police car comes screaming out of nowhere, sirens going and screeches to a halt in front of us. A young guy, must have only been about 5 years or so older than us, jumps out and starts giving us the whole hairdryer treatment. He lines us up and starts taking our statements of what we had been up to in the last hour / gloating at us. You lads are in trouble now, criminal damage, trespass, theft. You have really screwed up. With him was the local Bobby, and he came up to each of us in turn after the younger guy had grilled us and said very jovially, "Now don't worry lads, I'm sure it's a misunderstanding. We've had some reports of a break-in. You don't match the preliminary description, and I'm sure we'll get this cleared up when we get the more detailed description come through." So the more detailed description comes through the radio, and the young guy is wearing the biggest shit-eating grin you've ever seen. The description didn't even remotely match, and honestly the young guy looked so disappointed we all ended up feeling sorry for him. So yeah, that was probably quite embarrassing for him. Edit. Typing no good. I'm not a cop, but my mom had a story for this happen to her. Basically, it revolves around the show America's Most Wanted. A woman who looked almost exactly like my mom was featured on the show. She had the same hair, same face, and the kicker, same name. They even showed my mom's actual information, which I won't list here, as being the criminals. The story ended like every story on that show does. If you have any information regarding the whereabouts of this dangerous criminal, please call this number. Now on to my mom's perspective. She was just sitting at home on a Saturday night alone, as she lived alone. She was reading a Stephen King book when she hears some commotion coming from the hallway. She ignores it. Lots of yelling. She had not seen the show, which painted her as a criminal. Then suddenly bam. Her door is knocked down in an instant. About 10 cops flood into her 1-bedroom apartment, and she is arrested. She explained they had the wrong person. They claimed everything matched. Social security matched. DNA matched. Name matched. Photo resemblance matched. It turns out the woman was basically stealing my mom's identity and intentionally making herself look like my mom. The end result is that when they created a profile for the criminal, they used my mom's information to start with. So when they arrested my mom, of course the information matched. It was her information originally. They kept her in jail for 2 weeks. It wasn't until they took fingerprints from the scene of the crime they said she committed, and the prints didn't match, that they realized she wasn't the criminal. It's scary to think, if they had used her profile prints, rather than crime scene prints as the set to compare to, that she would have been still in jail today. It was basically a life sentence. Obligatory not a cop. A few years ago, my husband and I were having a lazy Sunday morning, making pancakes, blasting music, having a good time. There's a really loud banging on the door, and I rush over to answer it, thinking someone must have knocked a couple times before we heard it, and open it up to 4 police officers who push into our kitchen. 2 of them grab my husband and start telling him that he's being placed under arrest for a hit and run accident that took place in a city almost 2 hours away. Freaking out, my husband explains to the police that he was at work all night and just got home about an hour before that. He must have been really convincing, because 2 officers sat at our kitchen table with us, while the other 2 went outside to call my husband's workplace to confirm his story. Turns out, a car that we had sold about a year before that was involved in an accident that hit 3 parked cars and a woman the night prior. Woman had minor injuries, thankfully, but the driver was nowhere to be found. There was a clear video of our old car smashing into parked cars, hitting pedestrian, and a man jumping out of it shortly afterwards. When the police found the abandoned car and ran the VIN, it led them to our house. In Ontario, when you sell a vehicle, you're supposed to bring a slip into the Service Ontario Centre to prove that the ownership has transferred. But it's not really enforced, and there's no penalties for not doing it, because the person purchasing the vehicle needs to do the same to get plates, stickers, insurance etc. Obviously, and stupidly, we did not do this. Cops came back in, apologized for the mistake, gave us a half-hearted lecture about properly switching ownerships, and left. The dick that was actually driving the car was caught the next day. An officer called my husband to tell him and made a joke about us having to pay any impound fees. Edit. Clarification on the ownership change process. I had this problem for a few years because some guy named Frank had my number before me. The first year I had it, people kept calling me looking for him, but seemed to be just normal people, so annoying but easy to ignore. Then one day I'm in class and my phone vibrates with a phone call. It's in my pocket, so I go ahead and send it to voicemail. It immediately calls me back, so I do it again only for them to call again. So I go ahead and step outside to see who the hell needs to talk to me so badly, and it's a cop looking for Frank. I politely let him know that this isn't Frank's number and I don't know a Frank. If I recall correctly, he was like, "Are you sure?" "Yep, pretty sure I know. If I knew some random dude who people really want to talk to." Whatever. He believes me, said he'll make a note of it and apologizes, and that was the last I heard of Frank for 5 years. 2 years ago, I'm at work and a number calls me I don't recognize, so I send it to voicemail and they actually leave a message, so I go ahead and listen to it. Well, dear old Frank has gotten into some kind of trouble and is being told by a very stern sounding woman that he's going to be served the next day, and if he isn't at home then they are coming to his job, so he better not try to hide. Not exact wording, but certainly the spirit of the message. I laugh about it to my coworkers because they don't even have his current phone number, so how the hell are they going to find him? The next day the lady calls again, and this time I go ahead and answer because I don't want to spend any longer on this dude and his issues than I have to. Immediately this woman starts on how she's going to Frank's house to serve him, and I stop her, tell her this isn't Frank's number, and start to tell her it hadn't been in years, when she hung up on me mid-sentence. Extremely rude and unprofessional of her, but whatever, that was the last I've heard of Frank. Not a police officer, but a wrong person. I was sitting in my apartment. Girlfriend was in the shower. I heard knocking on the door and ignored it. Heard a knock again. Looked out the window. Nothing. Then came the cop knock. So I get up and open the door. Two cops with guns drawn were hiding behind the door frames and ask me to put my hands up. I comply. They ask, "Are you here with your girlfriend?" I'm super confused, but I say yes, because I am. They storm in and cuff me. About this time the girlfriend comes out of the shower, sees me handcuffed, and is understandably pissed. The whole time I'm asking what is going on, and saying I think there has been a mistake. Then the cop points out the door to an old guy, and asks, "Is this not your dad?" It wasn't, and I said no. What is going on? The cops look at the old guy, and he stumbles saying, No, that is not my son." The cops turned white. They were super embarrassed, and they left quickly. A couple hours later one of the cops comes back and apologizes. Apparently that old dude got a phone call from his estranged son saying he had a gun and was going to shoot his girlfriend. Don't know what came of that, but it wasn't me, and that dad apparently didn't even know where his son lived. Crazy day. Then I went and got some tacos and a margarita. Sorry to be just another person who wasn't the PO in the story. I was in high school and me and my 3 best friends were having a sleepover at one of their homes. We wanted to watch Netflix on the TV, but did not have an HDMI cord. My friend's dad said he'd drive us to Walmart to get a cord, but her older sister said she would instead. Kind of an important detail. Anyways, we make a turn out of my friend's neighborhood onto the main road and we saw sirens behind us. So my friend's sister pulled over. When the sirens did not pass us, we realized that we were being pulled over for some unknown reason. By the time we realized, the PO was already at our window. He had a really powerful voice and he yelled at my friend's sister to roll the window down. Now, by this point we are shaking and freaking out. As soon as she rolls the window down, the PO shines his flashlight at all of us. He sees 5 terrified teenage girls. Immediately he backs off. He asks for friend's sister's license. She hands it to him, and I just remember how much she was shaking. PO asks, "Do you know why I pulled you over?" Friend's sister says, "No sir, I honestly have no idea why." PO says, "Well, it's because of the way you came out of that neighborhood." friend's sister says okay. PO asks, are these your sisters? I think he's backpedaling at this point, because we are all clearly not sisters. He continues, well, your car matched the description of another car, so yes. Here is your license. Have a good night. After we started driving again, my friend's sister goes, I'm so glad my dad didn't end up driving you. And I honestly think about what might have happened if he was the one who drove us a lot. Edit. Grammar. Dispatcher here. I got 2 stories. 1. I get a call from another county not so close to us asking about a stolen license plate or car. I can't remember which. I ran what they had, and it came back stolen and reported with our agency. The officer says they are out with the car and the registered owner, and they swear they've never reported anything stolen and have never been to our county. Long story short, we entered it with a typo because the dispatcher wrote out the entry log first, handwritten, and then went to the NSIC terminal and entered it based on their log entry. They couldn't read their own handwriting and replaced a U and a V in the tag. What's worse is that we second and third party check all entries. So that's another experienced dispatcher and the shift supervisor checking off on this entry. Of course no one got into trouble for this. 2. The story goes that we received a warrant confirmation request from another agency and we confirmed the warrant based on the request. Turns out, the other agency stopped out with a kid and ran them by name. Their name was similar to someone with a warrant in our county. When their dispatcher sent the confirmation request, they used the info from our warrant entry to ask if we had a warrant on that person. Well, of course we do. What kind of stupid question is that? For those wondering, you are supposed to send the request using the info your officer gives you. If they did that, we probably would have spotted the error. So this kid that's never been to our county and has never been in trouble his entire life was picked up on a warrant on Friday that wasn't his and held in that jail until Monday because it was a no bond warrant and had to wait to see a judge. Kid's father finds out who confirmed the warrant on our side and starts harassing her on Facebook. That was fun. Not a police officer, but this is pretty relevant. Sorry, it's a long one. I was at my boyfriend's, we'll call him B, apartment in Louisiana, which is in kind of a rough neighborhood. We were watching a movie on the couch, and after taking my sleeping pills, fell asleep. At about 1:30 am, there's loud banging on the door, and B gets up to investigate. My pills knock me out pretty hard, so I barely opened my eyes and see B get yanked out the door, and about 9 officers flood the apartment. They start asking me tons of questions, and I'm barely coherent at this point. Ma'am, are you okay? Did you call the police? How long have you been asleep? What is your name? Etc. From outside the apartment, B tries telling them I fell asleep watching a movie, and they berate him for trying to answer for me. They are patting him down up against the wall outside and are about to cuff him. They radio dispatch to call back the number that dialed 911 and are searching the apartment listening for it. I hold up my phone and tell them we didn't call the police, but they won't listen. Once I finally was able to get a word in, I ask them what this is all about. Turns out, a woman in apartment 29 was being beaten by her boyfriend, and he was dragging her around by her hair, so she called the police. I tell them this is A29, but there's also B29, C29, and D29. Suddenly they all rush to me and are baffled by this new information. They start yelling, "We've got a GO. We've got a GO," and suddenly they're all gone. There's dents in the door and we didn't get an apology, but I'm happy with the way they handled the situation. If I had called the police for a domestic abuse case, they made me a priority. Not a police officer, but one time I was walking out of Walmart with some groceries. As I was on my way to my car, a police helicopter was circling around the parking lot. Over the helicopter's PA system they described me and told me to get on the ground. You in the grey shirt, bald head, in the Walmart parking lot, next to the green car, get down on the ground. Everyone in the parking lot was just staring at me. I didn't listen, because I just kept thinking I didn't do anything wrong. They have to be talking to someone else. As I'm putting the groceries in my car, I see 6 or 7 police cruisers coming my way through the parking lot, sirens on. At this point I'm just standing there like a deer in headlights. The police officers surrounded me and draw their guns, shouting at me to get on the ground. I comply. They pat me down and ask what I was doing at so and so apartment complex. I say I was never there, and they check my ID. Right after looking at my ID, I noticed all the officers were kind of confused and weren't really acting all hard up to me anymore. Then this older guy who looked like a high ranking officer walks up to me and says, "You are free to go 40 Osfried. Sorry for the misunderstanding." I asked what was all this about. He says, well, for lack of a better phrase, oopsie. Then he shook my hand and gave me a hug. We both laughed it off. As I was driving out of the parking lot, all the same police officers and many more had another man arrested on the hood of a police cruiser. He had a bald head like me, grey shirt, and green car. Everything identical. Another post from my time as a read-along. This time it's not creepy or deeply disturbing. It was a few years ago, roughly near the end of 2015. Dad, officer, and I were sitting in traffic on our way to get some lunch. He punched in the license plate in front of us and got a hit. The plates did not match the car, so he pulls them over and gets the story. The driver, it turns out, was a guy who apparently was out on a $10K bond. And it was either because of the license plate not being on the right car, he only put it on his good car because he thought it was okay to do since his old one broke, or something else which caused him to be arrested. Either way, he was polite and respectful, as was everyone else involved. The entire ride to the Dolly Bay was just off though. When we got inside and began processing, his name came up twice, both times with different bonds. Of the 2 different bonds, one was significantly higher. I'm talking 10 times higher. This was odd for a number of reasons according to pretty much everyone there. The most bizarre is that this person was in the system twice. Same name, same address, same image, and same prints. But nearly everything else was wrong. The crime was across the state and not on record. The version with the $100K bond had details such as tattoos that the guy my dad was processing didn't have. There was also details like scars and jewelry, tones and such which didn't match. As per protocol, they had to wait until someone from the state police could come and also verify the double entry. In that time, the person who was being processed was being held in the station until the state police could sort it out. I wasn't there for the rest of the story, but I did get some of the details when I went for another read-along and had to wait with the administrator. Turns out the guy my dad processed was the $100K bond guy, and somewhere down the line a clerk in the courts misfiled the 2 individuals. I'll admit that for the longest time, I expected to hear they had someone in the court system get paid to cover up for the $100K bond individual so they could escape. Then again, I was often bored on read-alongs, stuck in an old Crown Vic most of the time and bored. Still loved it though. Not a cop, but I was the one they were talking to. So at the time I was sitting in uni class, my roommate called me and told me the police were asking for me, but they would not tell him what for. My mind immediately went crazy, and I thought about the stuff that could have got me into trouble, which was pretty much nothing besides maybe some illegal downloads. I still could not concentrate anymore, so I decided to get to the next police station to clear it all up. So I got into the police station and stated my business. "Hi, my name is Wykes, first and surname. I was told you were looking for me. I heard the door lock close behind me. So you are Wykes, first and surname. Did you move from this state to that state a few months ago?" "Yes, I did. BC of uni. Can I please know what's going on?" No answer, but another officer came in with a piece of paper in his hand. They both looked at it, then at me. This kept on going for another few moments. Other officers came in and did the same. I had no idea what was going on. When I could not stand it anymore, I asked again what was going on. So they told me, "We are looking for a Wyke first and surname that moved from this state to that state a few months ago. He stole a car and some other crimes which I honestly do not remember anymore. But there were a few others like theft and whatnot, and he looks like this." so he turns a piece of paper over so I could see it, and it was crazy. From further away it really looked point like me, but when I looked closer at it, I point could tell it was not me, but as much alike that even some people I know a bit could have mixed us up. It took me another few minutes to convince them it wasn't me, and they eventually let me go. Not a police officer, but was the wrong guy questioned. I got called down to my high school principal's office at the end of the day, and there were 4 very serious looking cops. They started asking me about my friend and whether they were acting normal at the end of the day before, and I said yeah, everything was normal. Then they started asking me if I had drawn on her the day before. I did. I was holding a highlighter and we were friends in high school, so when she said you better not draw on me, I obviously did. They got even more serious and were saying things like, well, if she said no, why would you do it, huh? Do you just do things anyway whenever someone tells you no? And other very insinuating questions. Then they asked for the highlighter, which broke a few minutes after I drew on her, so I threw it away. They were not believing me whatsoever, but then they started calling buses, so I told them that my mom works, so unless someone was giving me a ride home I gotta catch my bus. They said something along the lines of, we don't have enough to detain you, but we will be back tomorrow to speak with you further. Really think about if you actually threw the highlighter away. Turns out, my friend was drugged/poisoned the day before during lunch. Someone slipped something in her drink. Apparently the hospital said it was possible that the drug/poison was mixed into the ink and it could have been administered that way. Me, the 16-year-old stoner who was failing chemistry, was apparently a chemist criminal mastermind on the same level of Walter White, mixing poison into highlighters just to fuck my friend up before they went home, to no benefit of my own. Her dad was former NYPD, so he called them and shit on them for harassing me and said that I didn't do shit and to leave me alone. I didn't tell my mom for like a year, but I realize now that them questioning me without a parent or lawyer present was super illegal. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Please leave a like and subscribe.